So my last video, I talked about some of the nerfs I think might be coming to Hearthstone, since we've been teased that balance changes are on the way. But I don't think things are going to stop with just nerfs. I think we're going to see a round of buffs as well, specifically for Death Knights. As we look here at the win rates for classes in standard format, well, Warrior's in a really bad spot at 42%. But Death Knight is right there behind it as the second to worst class, which normally wouldn't be too alarming. There's always a class or two that doesn't do quite as well. It's not like its win rate's drastically worse than everybody else like Warriors. But of course, Death Knight is brand new. It's the shiny, exciting new thing. We're supposed to be hyped about Death Knight. I'm almost certain Blizzard wants Death Knight to be competitive and viable and exciting for people to play. But they released it in a state that was a little bit safer from a balance standpoint, probably trying to avoid some of the perils of like Demon Hunter's release, where it was absolutely obscenely broken. It was just completely absurd and required excessive nerfs, both immediately within a day and then also some follow-up nerfs as well. So they erred on the side of caution here with Death Knight, but now that the results are in and they're seeing that Death Knight's a little weak, I suspect we'll see a round of buffs to Death Knight. And I wanted to talk about some of the things I might buff if I were to change Death Knight. And I guess specifically I wanted to take a look at the double rune and single rune cards for Death Knight, because right now the only decks people are playing are triple rune versions, and I thought it might be nice to add some power to those double and single rune cards. That also makes the triple rune decks stronger. That gives Death Knight some viability there perhaps, but might also open up some options for other rune combinations to actually see play. So I've proposed a handful of different buffs in this video. So kicking things off, we're going to start with the Scourge, and I proposed here moving it from 9 to 8 mana, and frankly I even thought about pushing it to 7 mana. I don't know if that would be completely out of line. And you might be thinking, hey wait, the Scourge isn't that bad of a card. I've seen that do some pretty cool stuff. And you're right, it's not bad, it's decent, but we're looking to take things from decent and make them good. We need to push the power level a little bit to really help Death Knight find success. So this would both make triple unholy deck stronger by having another 8 mana option that could really swarm the board sooner, swing the board sooner. But also, if you give a really powerful card like this to rune combinations, then you're not totally sacrificing your ability to make that really big late game play. When you lose a card like Lord Marrowgar, you've still got an awesome 8 mana play in the Scourge instead. So that might allow you to dip into Frost to get more card draw or some mana cheats, while still preserving that ability to pop off and do something crazy a little bit earlier in the game than might be possible with a 9 mana Scourge. Speaking of which, if we look at double Frost cards, I thought it might be nice to look at Rime Fang Sword. And what if it discounted spells by 2 instead of by 1? I thought it might be a little too much to still keep it as a 2/3, so I changed it to a 2/2. But what that means is you're both discounting one spell much faster. That 2 mana discount immediately could allow a spell to be played right away, whereas perhaps a 1 mana discount might not open up as many options there. But you're also getting 4 mana in total discounts instead of 3 mana in total discounts on the original version of the card that only discounted by 1, and you're getting those over 2 turns as opposed to over 3 turns. So basically speeding up the tempo of this card rather substantially, even though you're taking a durability away. And I think that would allow Frost decks to push a lot faster and turn the corner a lot faster in regards to damage, or sometimes cheating out big advantageous spells or even small spells as well. And then if you think about this in combination with a blood deck, for instance, you might be able to discount a removal spell, getting your mid-game removal out a turn or 2 sooner, helping you stabilize faster against aggressive decks. So changes like this both enable Frost to do powerful things, but also might open up opportunities in those other runes as well. Similarly here, what if we took Corrupted Ashbringer and pushed it to 5? Again, I think this is a totally fine card at 6. It's getting played in blood decks. I think it's great, but We want it to be really good. We want to push the class. It's not great enough to make Death Knight a top tier class, or, you know, even a mid tier class. It's a bottom tier class right now. So you got to push these things a little more. And why not, you know, an Arcanite Reaper that has lifesteal? I don't think that's totally out of line. And what that might do is not only make Corrupted Ashbringer a card that's really fitting and good for a control deck, a ton of healing options for a blood deck, might also just be a great finisher for, say, a deck that's willing to mix in some Unholy. Maybe you just like the damage efficiency on this one for a Frost deck. So again, if you're mixing these runes, I think this is the kind of card that can serve that dual utility where it's good for blood being a control, stabilizing, healing kind of deck, but it also might suddenly become good as a more aggressive option as well if you're able to lower the mana cost like you see here. So I also wanted to look at some single rune cards like Possessifier here. What if we push this one to 4 mana instead of 5? And yeah, again, man, that card looks kind of nuts at 4 mana. I don't think it's terrible at 5, but we got to make it good. And at 4 mana, you're getting a lot here, which in particular, I think shores up some weaknesses for corpse generation for Frost and Blood decks, which can sometimes struggle when generating corpses. But this thing in particular can often give you 4 immediate corpses, but it also gives you that onboard reactivity. So in an Unholy deck where this might be more about going wide and getting all these sticky minions and leveraging that, if you put this in a Frost deck or a Blood deck and it's far more powerful at 4 mana than 5, suddenly it becomes a control tool that's more about like, okay, I'm going to use these minions to take trades, kind of keep up on board early while still contributing to my corpse total. Maybe this, for instance, sets up my corpse explosion on turn 5. Those sorts of plays start to make a lot more sense when Possessifier is a much stronger card by taking a mana cost off. Similarly for Obliterate, what if we just deleted the back half of the text here so that it just read, destroy a minion. You no longer take damage. You just get to destroy a minion for 2 mana. Is that better than an Assassinate? Yeah, it's way better. Is that out of line with modern day power in Hearthstone? I don't think so. That we have things like priests that are able to destroy minions very efficiently. You know, the Light It Burns, for instance, is 1 mana. Very often just reads destroy a minion. Yes, it technically has some conditions, but I don't think this would be out of line from a power level standpoint. And in particular, what it does is it removes the weakness that only blood can really tolerate for this card. In other words, blood decks are okay to take that damage. This is a blood card and they're like, okay, yeah, whatever, we've got like 70 health. I can take some damage when removing a minion. But when you look at Frost and Unholy, they're far less willing to sacrifice that much life in order for some cheap, higher tempo removal like this. They may not be able to do that, which means they can't really run a blood card like this. There are suddenly no incentives for them to split off into different runes. But if you can run Obliterate, if there is no downside, if there is no risk there, suddenly maybe moving to 1 blood rune could offer you some nice utility and tools that you otherwise wouldn't have. Frost is like, okay, yeah, I really value that cheap removal so much that I'm willing to move into blood runes a little bit. So I think by freeing up some of the limitations of these cards that are really specific to the rune, particularly for these 1 rune options, that does create more options for rune diversity that don't currently exist. I think the same could be said for a card like Thessarian, and this card's really good, right? I think this is one of the best Death Knight cards that there is. He just feels great to play. He's, you know, this awesome body on board, really high friction, can be chip damage, can be a board presence. But what if he was just a little better? What if this were the reason to run a single Frost sort of card? I think you need some really encouraging, high-powered single rune stuff to get decks in a place where they're willing to go away from the triple rune aspect. For instance, this Thessarian in an Unholy deck would be absolutely bonkers. It might be reason enough to dip into Frost because this card is just even better. It's already really good, and now it's just even higher damage output, higher pressure, higher threat. And for a blood deck, you know, this could help you in like a hand buff deck that's a little bit more aggressive. That's something we haven't seen blood do very well at all. They're just strictly control decks right now, those big greedy triple blood decks. But if you've got cards like this that you're able to dip into for your hand buff deck, and Thessarian suddenly like a 6/3 or 6/5 or something, it's like, man, okay, I get it. This card's so strong. This card's so good that I'm willing to move into the Frost, which doesn't normally happen. And of course, this also just makes things like Triple Frost even more competitive as well, which it still needs a little bump. So yeah, again, an insanely strong card. I get it. This looks like really, really, really good, but that's what I think that we need to make sure Death Knight's actually competitive. So then finally, what about some non-rune typed? So finally, what about a non-rune typed card? Well, I think we could just make Body Bagger give 2 corpses. Is this really going to hurt anything? I don't think so. I think it's okay if Death Knight has a little bit more consistent corpse generation. The corpse payoff cards currently in Death Knight just aren't that crazy. Like, they're not really doing anything busted even when you have the corpses. So making sure that that corpse consistency is there, that those payoffs are going to be more readily available on time, I think that would be completely fine. Body Bagger could easily give 2 corpses. I don't think that would create any issues at all because the power level on the rest of the cards isn't so crazy high that this creates issues. So yeah, I guess those are the cards I would change if I were going to buff Death Knight. But also real quick, can we just do this for Warrior? I didn't want to make this video about Warrior too much. I wanted to make it more about Death Knight. There's obviously a lot of things you need to do to help Warrior. But why does Thora Balor have a limitation on how many times it can be revived? That's completely unnecessary. There aren't so many fire spells that this is just getting like obscene value over and over again. I think it would be fine if it could just be revived forever. We've got other cards that have done similar things. Think about the Rat King, for instance, in Hunter. I think this would be okay. Maybe if Warrior gets 3 more expansions of fire spells, it could be a problem, but otherwise, this would be absolutely fine. This card does not feel broken as is. Give Warrior a little help, make their legendaries more awesome, take away that negative text. That said, I am curious what all of you think here about these buffs or other buffs you might have. I know when you look at these individually, a lot of these cards like scream, oh man, that's really strong. In a vacuum, that's just way better than other things. But yeah, that's the point. That's the goal. I think they need to be better. They're not doing the job right now because Death Knight is still lagging behind everybody else. So you got to push power levels on some of these cards here and there. And I tried to do it in a way that was conscious of opening up other rune combinations for cards that kind of filled in weaknesses or shored up some of the gaps in certain rune combinations. But I'm curious to hear if you guys have other ideas as well for cards you think might stand out in that regard and really help Death Knight find some new options across runes, but also just find some raw power level as well, because I think the class does need a little hand, and I'm almost certain Blizzard does not want to see Death Knight near the bottom of this list. They don't want it to be OP broken like Demon Hunter was, but a little higher up, nearer to the top, you know, some good tier 1 or tier 2 options I'm sure would be well received by Blizzard, and I'm sure they're a little sad it's not showing up in the World Championships right now either. So I would expect some sort of changes to come through. Not necessarily all of these, of course, but a handful certainly seems possible. That said, curious on your thoughts. Thanks so much as always for watching, and until next time, game on.